One thing that I really don't like about my 2021 Renault Zoe is this. There is just nowhere to store the charging cable as standard. It just kicks around in the boot. We've got the charging cable here and the first aid kit, and it's just always just rattling around in the boot. There's nowhere really to put it. A lot of other EVs have dedicated storage, not so much for the Zoe. Well, that was until I found out that this existed. I mean, it's basically just a big lump of foam with then a sort of boot carpet thing that goes on top of it. But what it is, essentially, is a sort of false boot floor that you can put in the boot that then gives you this area where you can store your charging cable. And I think that's absolutely fantastic. So I thought that was a must-have accessory for me. So I was quite surprised when I looked online, actually, and I saw that Renault dealers that are at least supplying parts online want £220 for this, for some foam and a sort of carpet-backed bit of plywood that's the sort of false boot floor thing. I thought that was an incredible amount of money for what it was. However, it does really transform the usability of the boot of the Zoe. Not having the charging cable just rolling around all the time and not having to worry about, putting things on top of it and all that makes a really big difference. Thankfully, I was lucky enough to actually get this one second hand. I mean, it was basically brand new. The guy still had the receipt from the dealer he bought it from. He paid £175 for it over the counter at his local Renault dealer. So I'm guessing maybe if you go to your dealer rather than order it online, the price is sort of variable. But I paid 110 quid for it second hand, including delivery. And given it is pretty much as new, it does look brand spanking new. I think that's a pretty good deal. But it definitely does make a really big difference. Now, the only downside, I guess, is if you regularly have a lot of stuff in your boot, your cable is then underneath it all, and you've got to lift everything out of the way to then get to your cable. That doesn't really matter so much for me. I think any times when I tend to be travelling and need my cable to charge, because obviously if you're travelling long distance, you'll be using rapid chargers. Especially if you've got CCS, you're going to be using rapid chargers, so you don't need to worry too much about getting the cable out mid-journey. So that definitely isn't much of a concern for me. I tend to use my cable most often at the office, so I charge there, so I don't have a boot full of stuff when I go to work. So it works pretty well. I think that's definitely the best way to keep things neat and tidy. Is it worth 220 quid? Not so sure, but for the sort of 100 quid, £110 I paid for it, that's fair enough, I think. It keeps things nice and tidy. I think it's all right. But let me know what you think in the comments. Would you pay that for this, for the Zoe? And also, was this an option when they were new? Could I have added that on if I bought this car new? I'm not sure. I don't really know too much about it. Was that something that was on the options list? And if it was, and if you got one with yours when you bought one new, how much did you pay for it? Because it does seem like a strange thing to miss off the options list, but a really useful thing to be able to buy and install. So quite happy with that. But life with Zoe in general, I thought I would do a little bit of an update on how things are going. So I've been back and forth to the office a couple of times. I reset the trip computer before the first time. So since then I've done 462.8 miles. And it's been very, very non-eventful. Being able to charge at home now, for those of you that follow me on Twitter and stuff, you'll see I was posting about my new home charger. I've got the Zappy fitted, so being able to charge up and have 100% when I leave in the morning, it is really, really useful, and then I can charge at the office. Economy wise, over those 468 miles, we're showing 3.9 miles per kilowatt hour, which might, given the weather, I mean, it's not exactly been a roasting hot summer so far, has it? But given the weather we've been having, it's still fair weather. I mean, it's 25 degrees at the moment when I'm filming this, but it's been fair weather, and maybe that economy says more about my driving style than about the economy of the Zoe. I am renowned for, whether it be a petrol car or an electric one, being on the lower side of economy. I've got quite a heavy right foot, so I'm not really surprised that it might be a little bit lower than some people might expect. However, I mean, at the moment we've got 46% battery, and I'm showing 97 miles on the guessometer, so we're still talking about 200 miles of sort of real world usable range. I'm happy with that. That's absolutely fine. Because I can charge at work, I don't really worry about it with the commute, but it does mean if I leave with a full battery from home, I'm not rolling in with hardly any charge, worried about it. So I think it really does show that the sort of 52 kilowatt hour battery in the Zoe ZE50 really is pretty usable, especially for that use case I've got where it's sort of 110, 115 miles each way to work. So it's working really well so far. I was quite surprised how much interest there was in Zoe, so I posted on Twitter about it, about the fact that I bought a nearly new electric car with a 200-mile range, and it's 150 quid a month on finance, and loads and loads and loads and loads of people were commenting. And actually, most of it, if you've sifted through the sort of, oh, I don't believe you, I don't believe it was possibly that cheap, or obviously it was that cheap because EVs are worthless and nobody wants them, or the really good ones where I don't know why you would buy a car on finance, closely followed up with EVs are going to be worthless when they're 3 or 4 years old anyway. So surely buying one on PCP where you can hand it back to the finance company that's a good thing, right? If values are going to drop through the floor and you can just walk away from it and say, well, hey, Renault Finance, this is your problem now, that would be the ideal place to be. But I guess that's Twitter for you, or X as it's now called. So the range of opinions was quite staggering. I mean, I was single-handedly taking down the motor trade by having the gall to buy a heavily depreciated EV, because obviously someone somewhere has lost quite a lot of money on this car, and that's my fault. It's my fault on tour facing financial difficulties. Not quite sure how that works. But anyway, a lot of interest, and a lot of people were saying, oh, that's actually a really good deal. Where can I get one? So a couple of people actually messaged me saying, well, actually, I went to Bristol Street Motors and I've bought a Zoe based off seeing your post on Twitter. So I think that's pretty cool. And I think a lot of people, all the mince aside that you get on Twitter, a lot of people do actually realise it's a really good deal. And if you are looking for a nearly new 200-mile electric car, it's really, really hard to find anything else that's better value on the market. And I know I keep saying this in the weekly news videos and in the used market review videos and stuff, but the Zoe at the moment is still really hard to beat in terms of value for money. And I think some of the responses, the more sensible ones on Twitter, definitely agreed with that. I was really surprised to see that on the infotainment screen here, you can bring up more information about your economy and your usage. If I look at the energy info screen, it shows that for that 462.8 miles that I've covered, and I've used 119.7 kilowatt hours, showing an average of 3.9 miles per kilowatt hour, all well and good. But it also shows that the climate consumption, so the use of aircon and heating in here, has used 2.1 kilowatt hours. So, I mean, that's actually a tiny, tiny percentage. I hear a lot of people saying, oh, about the aircon and the heating uses loads of battery and you need to worry about that. But I mean, I never, ever turn the aircon or the heating off. It's set to a temperature and that's it. I have noticed in the Zoe, though, if you actually want it to heat, like properly heat, you need to turn the aircon off, which is a bit weird. But I generally never, ever are in the situation where I'm like, oh, I want to save battery, so I'll turn the climate off. And that's definitely something I ever consider, not at all. But interesting to see that such a tiny percentage of my consumption goes on the climate. So I think it shows that in most modern EVs, you don't even need to think about it. I think as long as you're not ramping the heater up to the absolute maximum all the time, you don't need to think about it, because the amount of energy that is used in the grand scheme of things is pretty little. See, Zoe does have a heat pump as well, so that does help a bit with efficiency, but I was quite surprised. I've never seen an EV break it down like that, where it'll actually show me how much the climate is using, but I'm pretty happy with that. I think it's doing pretty well. That's right. Interesting, the average speed of those 462.8 miles is 44.8 miles per hour as well. And that is driving on A roads and motorways at the speed limit. I think it shows, though, with the traffic and stuff, with the level of congestion we have in a lot of parts of this country, your average speed isn't quite as high as you might think it is. But that was, I mean, it's a very, very quick sort of how's things going with Zoe. Very, very happy so far. I will try and do some more sort of live action on the road content with Zoe very, very shortly, but it was a bit of it's going well, it's doing and car type stuff. I'm really happy with the false boot floor thing I've just bought for the cable. I definitely think it's worth looking at if you are considering where you're going to store your cable in your Zoe. I've seen people cobble up things to put the cable in, whether that be hooks or bags or whatever, but I thought getting the proper Renault thing was the way to go. But very quick video. Thank you very much for watching. Do check out channel membership if you haven't already. If you want to get access to some of that member exclusive content on the channel, channel membership is the way to go. It starts from just 99 pence per month, and I'm hopeful that as I start to build up the member exclusive content, that will deliver some real value for you. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.